dear Thai, dear beloved community. It's a joy to be here. It's a real joy to be here. It's actually a real joy to be anywhere, everywhere, to be alive. Listening to all the wisdom of the brothers and Brother Ivan, Brother Alvin, and Sister Remy with her beautiful guided meditation, I thought, what is left? What can I say? How can I add to what they've already offered? So beautiful and pretty complete, I think. Yeah. Maybe a few gaps in there. So Brother Ivan asked for a topic. We always like to have a topic, right? But what I've noticed over the years with our teacher, and it's become true for me too, is that no matter the topic, he always talked about what he wanted to talk about. But I'm not sure that it was actually that he wanted to talk about it, but that the energy in the Sangha prompted him. Somehow he intuitively or energetically picked up on what was happening in the collective and those people who were listening to him, who were in the room with him. And I've even had that experience, have felt that on Zoom. So it's proven to me that even when we can't be in the same room with each other, when we're looking at images, how real that is and how space really is an illusion. So we might I have one of those clocks in the house. You might want to consider having one in yours. Of course, we have many bells of mindfulness, but that's such a beautiful one. And of course, you can also set it on your phone from the Plum Village app. You can hear that, or you can hear the sound of the bell. You can set it for 15 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour, and take that as a real practice, an opportunity to practice coming back to the breath. Because it takes a whole lot of practice to come back to the breath. It really does. For all of our lives, we've taken it for granted. The breath is just there, right? We don't think about that. But now that we've found this practice, and we hear that actually it is something we can think about and be grateful for and be aware of. So even when we are, when we know that we might be thousands of miles away from each other, we really aren't, because everything is energy, and we're energy. And the people on the screen today on Zoom, they're energy, and they're with us in this room, and we're with them wherever they are. It might be something to ponder. It might be something to contemplate. It might be a new way of thinking for you. It's very helpful to think like that and to realize the truth of that, because then we never feel alone, because we're never really alone. We never have to feel lonely. We're never alone. How beautiful is that? And yet some of us really suffer from feelings of loneliness and alienation, feeling that whatever I'm going through is, I'm doing it all by myself, or I have the full responsibility of the family, or I'm the only one who can do that, and I'm doing it all alone, and no one's aware, and I'm feeling very overwhelmed, maybe, just feeling terribly responsible. And I think, I wasn't born in Asia, and I'm not Asian by birth. I've been out here for 17 years, and I'm well aware that the habit energy of work, of being productive, of being responsible for achieving is huge in Asian society. People say no one works more than Americans, but we don't know how to play. And I do think that's true. I think that's true. But I don't think that necessarily comes from the same energy or the same belief that is here in Asia. It's not that I don't believe that Americans work themselves into the ground because they are trying to achieve or something. They're actually simply running. I think we Americans run a lot. After 9/11, I remember at 9/11 when the Twin Towers were bombed in New York City. I remember sitting the next week with my root guru. So Thai says that the person who births you spiritually is your root guru. And mine was my psychotherapist. I started in psychotherapy as grief support, and it became my life's path, learning who I am and who you are and who we are. And I remember sitting with her. Let's see, can you hear me all right? I apologize for this. I don't always sound quite like this. I'm recovering from bronchitis. So maybe, I'm not sure if I'm being heard or not. Will somebody tell me? It sounds awfully quiet to me. I remember sitting with her, and I was quite angry. Not with the people who bombed the World Trade Center. I was angry with the American response. I felt that if an act like that could ever be justified, that I could understand why people might do something like that out of desperation. And so I said to her, I'm just so angry, disappointed, really. Underneath the anger was disappointment, sadness. Anger is always a cover. Underneath the anger, if you can get below it, there's always grief there, disappointment, sadness, fear. At the base, fear. And so I'm just so disappointed in how we're responding, and what I hear fellow Americans saying, and the anger and the hatred and all of that. And I remember she shook her head and she said, "Trish, it's good to remember that we Americans are a nation of teenagers. We have a teenage psyche. We have a teenage psyche." Now, I know it's very difficult and maybe not even correct to generalize about Americans, because we're a lot of different cultures and a lot of different people. And some of us have been there a long, long time. Our ancestors have been there a long, long time. And others have just arrived. So you can't really generalize. Or maybe you can. I don't know. But I realized I could agree with her on that. That as Americans, both of these, you want me to talk into both of these? I feel really important. I'd better come up with something really good to say. Okay, carry on. So, so yes, I could agree with her. We tend to be a people who we don't like for you to tell us how to do anything. We can do it by ourselves, thank you. I did it all by myself, and you can too. You just have to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, you know. Yeah, you work really hard, you can make it. If you don't work really hard, and there are a lot of lazy people in our country. So that's sort of the American discourse sometimes, what we hear, what we say to each other. Not very kind, not very understanding at all. So very, very much like teenagers. We can do anything, we think. So we tend to be rather, I think, as a people, rather arrogant and to the point of belligerence. Sometimes know it all. So please don't fall into that trap, because it really is a trap. And people who feel that way and who think like that suffer a lot. So Americans suffer a lot, as do almost everybody else in the world. So we have to have that, of course. We have to have some kind of suffering. That tends to be, in my experience, the American version of suffering. Can't get enough, can't have too much. Always trying to prove something to ourselves. So I don't know if there's a little bit of that in Asian culture or not, but I know that there's an awful lot of feeling very responsible, and I'm here to tell you that on this path, so this does actually take us maybe for a moment to the title of the talk, which is Flowing as a River. And I think of that in two ways. One is Ty talks about, our teacher talks about the importance of flowing as a river, and he means as a sangha. He means as a group of people, as a community of people. And he uses the metaphor, which I love, of we're like, each of us is a drop of water. And if we try to do alone, if we try to go it alone, if we believe that we're doing that, and we've struggled to do that, we can burn out very easily. And as a drop of water, that means you evaporate. You just can't keep going. But if you put all these drops of water together, we can do anything. Yeah, we can get all the way to the ocean in that river. The other way I think of it, and this was actually what I had in mind when I came up with this, which was very spur of the moment. Brother Ivan had written and said, what is your topic for Saturday? And I wrote back and I said, I'm still waiting to get the answer to that question. I don't know really. But eventually I came up with that. And what I was really thinking was a little bit of an extension of what we talked about Thursday night, for those of you who were with us Thursday night, either here in the Sangha house or online. And that topic was something like, I think it was, I'm not sure what the verb was. Maybe it was maintaining or keeping a calm and peaceful mind in difficult moments. So this sort of piggybacks on that, what I'm thinking about today. And that is, what do we do? How does it go for us when life just doesn't go the way we thought it would? Or when the moment is not what we thought it would be. So we had an expectation maybe. Maybe it was one that we had for years. Maybe it was a goal that we had and we worked toward it. But when we got there, somehow it wasn't so fulfilling. It wasn't what we thought it was going to be. I remember years and years ago, long before I found this path, I had friends who um, they were both dentists, and they in America, and they worked really hard. And both of them liked to ski, downhill skiing, and they loved to go to Vail, Colorado. So they had a dream of retiring there. So they bought land, and I'm glad I'm not the only one who's coughing today. It's nice to have company. You see, you're never the only one. But they bought land, and they worked really hard for years to pay for that land. And I was friends with them through those years, and I can tell you that they weren't particularly happy years. They worked a lot, both of them, to pay for that land in Vail, Colorado. But when they got there, the habit energy of unhappiness, of working so hard, of running, didn't let them slow down. They never quite retired. He opened up a practice there. So he continued to work. Well, who's to say? Certainly not I, that was wrong. But it was simply not what they had imagined. It was not what they envisioned. But they actually set themselves up for it. You can see that, how working. If you work every day and you're thinking of something that's 20 years from now, or even 5 years from now, you develop that habit energy of running after that thing, grabbing after that thing, imagining it's going to be like that. And then you get there and it's just not like that, because the world has changed around you. Everything has changed. The truth of impermanence, nothing stays the same, including you, including me. Yeah, the truth of impermanence. So that can be very difficult to remember moment to moment, or day to day anyway, the truth of impermanence. Usually we can remember it every few years when we look in the mirror and we can see the changes. And we say, oh yeah, well, yeah, I don't look the way I looked. Yeah, and that's a good thing to do, because it reminds us that nothing stays the same. And that brings my thought process to relationships, to our relationship with ourselves, but also our primary relationship, or the relationship in the family, whether it's with a spouse or mother, father, or brother, sister, child, your own children. And that is how important it is if we can remember that everything is always changing, including the people in our lives. And I've heard Ty say that when I heard this is in about 1999, he said in a Dharma talk in Vermont, USA, if you think that you know that person who's sitting next to you, if you think that you know that husband or that wife, that spouse, that is a supreme form of arrogance. Arrogance. To think that we know someone so well that there's nothing else to learn about them. I've been married to that person. She's been that way. She's always been that way. She'll always be that way. So we touched on this a little bit Thursday night, and I find myself doing it again. So I guess I'm thinking it's important, or maybe there's somebody in this room who needs to hear that. And if we can stay open to the truth of impermanence, and if we can allow the people in our lives to evolve, to become their best self, oh, the happiness, oh, my happiness, you can say. And they can say that, oh, I can be myself. Yeah. But how often we put each other in a box. And we do that very often because we're not ready to change. and down deep, we know that if we allow that person to change, I will change too. It has to be that way. I mean, of course, if you're an angry person, if you are behaving in an angry way, I'm going to respond in a certain way. If you come in smiling and all sweetness and handing me a flower that you found on the roadside and thought of me, then my response is something entirely different. And I have to step back and say, wow, yeah, I thought he was so angry, but now I see the sweetness in him that I never, maybe I saw it before we married, but somewhere it got lost. It got lost because I thought I knew him, because I got caught up in some kind of interaction, and that actually happened with me in my marriage. So I know what I'm talking about that anyway. So I encourage you. But how do we do that? How do we allow our loved ones to be who they are? And how do we generate the courage? Because it does take courage to embrace change in ourselves. How do we do that? There are a number of different ways. We do it by nourishing ourselves. And one way we do that is by being in a group like this, having regular contact with spiritual friends, and to the extent possible within our tradition, I feel it very strongly. It's so helpful when we can have regular contact with monks and nuns, because they live the life, they live the practice 24/7. They're in a bit of a cocoon or a bubble. Of course, everything comes to them and everything is already in them, so they too suffer within that, but they support each other to practice, and they have constant teachings, and that's the life. So they're constantly changing in the direction they want to go in. But we, on the other hand, as lay people, we don't have that constant support. We're sort of out there. We're in that river. And sometimes, that came up last night as a metaphor, this did, that sometimes we're floating along in the river, and I can see myself doing it. I've sort of always managed to live by a river for some reason, by a body of water, and it's always been a river. That I can see myself just floating along, going with the current, going with the flow, in other words. But then sometimes there will be a little break in the river. You'll come to a fork, and here's which way to go. And I've done this. I've done this in reality in a kayak. We say, this is a creek I've never noticed before. I'll try this creek. Maybe it'll come out over here and join the river again, only to find myself in the weeds, really to find myself in the marsh grass, stuck, trying to back up and turn around in a narrow little spot and get back to the river. But we do that in our daily life too, don't we? Where we just get off track a bit. But the good news is you can always figure out how to turn around and get back on track. And especially if you know that there's a Sangha house, you know that there are people here to support you, to listen to you. If you feel that you need a place that you can come and talk and just be heard, not judged, nothing, just heard. I think we probably have all had experience with just being heard, how important that is. Sometimes out in life, that can be really hard to realize, because people tend to be, if they're not in the practice, they tend to be in a hurry. And the habit energies make it very difficult for people to pay full attention to anything. Have you noticed that? Especially as we have more and more technology to make our lives easier, somehow our lives have become more complicated. At least mine has. Yeah, the smartphone really changes how the brain works. Makes it much more difficult. The more we're on the smartphone, the more difficult it is to concentrate on any one thing for very long. So, what a gift when someone sits across from us and just listens and lets us make eye contact and just listens with an open heart and an open mind. And we can do that for each other. We don't have to come to the Sangha house to do it. We can do that in our families. We can do it with our children, with our loved ones, even those people who are maybe saying things that we don't want to hear, that we don't like to hear. I used to have the strong habit energy because of wounds in me that were not healed, of finding it very difficult to listen to my husband. The words hurt. He wouldn't necessarily be talking about me. He was just talking, but he was saying things that I didn't agree with. And I didn't want to believe that I was with a man who had those thoughts or something like that. I just know that it was so strong in me. But then one day I realized one of the reasons it was so strong in me was because it was the habit energy of my father. I had grown up with mother and father who had that same experience. My mother would be saying things my father didn't want to hear. And at some point, he would get around to saying, okay, now maybe just don't say that. Don't say that. And it would get worse and worse because she would keep, because that was her habit energy. She was trying to get his attention and he didn't want to give it to her because he was really shut down and emotionally shut down from a very painful childhood. Now, I didn't know those things, of course, as a child. I didn't know those things until in the early 90s, I guess, when I was in therapy and started looking at my family of origin and my childhood. So if you all haven't done that, I invite you to do that. It's so rich to really, really look at your own childhood, what that childhood experience was, and then to begin to look at your parents and try to understand what their childhood was, and so on. That's how we heal the wounds. That's how we heal the ancestral wounds. So actually, the experience I was having of not wanting to hear certain things was, I'm sure, doubly strong because of that energy in me from my father. Yeah. I am my father, you know. You are your father. You are your mother. We aren't just connected. We are them. We are their continuation. They're in every cell of our body. In every cell. I'm also my great, 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 great grandparents. And you are too. So we are a continuation, this long stream of life. How beautiful is that? Yeah. So here I am as Trish. Here you are in the form that you're in now. And one day we'll be in another form. And when we can realize that, so much fear is released. So much fear. Because when we think that when we take that last breath, it's just over. The light went out, it's just over. Or when we think that our loved one has taken his or her last breath, that it's over and they're gone. Oh, they're gone. No, they haven't gone anywhere. Nowhere. Because they didn't come from anywhere. How incredible is that to know? It changes everything when we know that. It changes everything about how we live our daily life when we know that. When we can let go of that fear and we can begin to see our own life, each of us, our own life is high adventure. It's really high adventure. I don't know what's going to come next. And you can say, oh, I don't know what's going to come next. Or you can say, I don't know what's going to come next. Big difference, right? It's a big difference. But it's something we can learn. And maybe you already know that. Or maybe you've known that in the past and you forgot it. You know, Tai says, the Buddha says, actually, you know, each of us, we don't really, what does he say? I'm not telling you something you don't know. There's nothing I can tell you, nothing I can say that you don't already know. It's just whether or not you've remembered it, whether you're ready to remember it, whether the conditions are there yet for you to remember it. And that's what we do along and along in our life. We remember this and then we remember that. And those are the moments of enlightenment. Yeah. So, you know, enlightenment is not some mystical something. It's just, I understand that now. I get it. And now my job is not to forget it again and to see how can I apply that, or how is that serving me in my life and those around me. Because, of course, my happiness is your happiness, and my unhappiness is your unhappiness. So, again, to quote Tai, that happiness is not an individual matter. No, it's a collective matter. So I've said a lot. I'm going to be quiet for a moment and ask Brother Lawrence if he would invite a bell. And why don't we all take the opportunity to just take 3 nice breaths, 3 nice conscious breaths. I am also going to have a drink of water, so I invite you to join me in that. We just finished last Sunday, weeks of retreats in Vietnam. And we had a lot of sickness during those retreats, and including me. But we the last 2-week retreat, the last 2 weeks, one of the names that was coined for our Sangha, some of whom are online today, I think, with us, was the coughing course, Sangha, coughing course, because so many of us were coughing. And the ultimate came when on the last evening, I thought I was recovered quite a bit from the bronchitis, but one of the lay sisters who sings beautifully, she and I had arranged to finish the evening, to go out with a bang, you might say. And we offered the bell sound, which you can hear online. And it's just so beautiful. And so she was offering the chant, and I was on the bell. Well, I had a coughing fit throughout most of it. But she kept chanting, and I kept inviting the bell. But at the same time, I am just coughing and coughing. There were about 23 or 24 of us in the room. And afterwards, I said, well, it was both beautiful and very unusual. But you know, when what I've learned for myself anyway is that once I began to really go with the flow, even something like that no longer really disturbs me. And I hope those around me can feel that feeling of acceptance of just being with what was. I mean, what can one do, you know? No sense in getting upset about it. I had to cough. And so it was what it was. But it's a really good place to get to, where we don't feel that we have to be perfect, that we don't have to perform. We can be ourselves. Be beautiful, be yourself. That sign behind me, the calligraphy behind me. How beautiful is that? Be beautiful, be yourself. Don't have to do anything. Just be yourself. Be yourself. It's good enough. It's good enough. But we do have that habit energy of performing for others, for feeling we have to do something perfectly, for losing sleep, becoming anxious as we think about something we have to do on Monday or Tuesday, something part of our work, or, you know, we can stress about that. We don't have to do that. We don't have to do it like that. We can learn to trust the process, trust moment to moment. And if I stay present in the moment, the right words will come. They will be exactly what somebody, maybe many somebodies need to hear, including me. So when I don't get caught up in planning, it makes even what I have to say an adventure for me, because I don't know what's going to come. So it makes life so much more interesting, not a problem to be solved, but a joy to be alive. So I think we have maybe a little over 20 minutes before we break for lunch. I'd like to ask we have quite a few people here in the Sangha house, and then of course we have, I don't know how many online, but perhaps there's a question or two or three that you all would like to ask, and then I can do my best to channel Thai. It's okay.
Brother David, are you just splash the questions?
Just wait. Okay.
So for those friends who are in this business space, you can forget about this if you don't want to. Just raise your hand and we'll pass the mic to you and just ask for Sister Trish questions. just raise your hands, and even if you're not enough, you can just stand up and just ask briefly.
And know this, that when you ask a question, I think you can remind yourself that actually you're not alone in this room. You're asking the question for the whole group. You have the support, the energetic support of everybody in the room that is perhaps pushing you a little to ask that particular question. And when I do my best to channel Thai and answer the question, I am answering the question for all of you. So I don't hear it as really as a personal question so much, and I don't give a personal answer. The answer is for the whole group, just like when we sit in Dharma sharing groups. When we speak for everyone and to everyone.
All right, please. You need the mic? Okay, I think.
Try.
Okay, yeah, sure.
Just now during the sitting, I didn't find it hard to sit with my difficult feelings, but in daily life, I find it incredibly hard, and I always find myself running away, by distracting myself, or by eating, or by doing classes, as you mentioned. How can we manage our very offer of samsara when the tendency is to run away and hide? Sitting there was fine.
Yeah.
I can't be sitting there every day.
Yeah. Yeah. Just repeat the question. Yeah. So repeating the question for our online friends. So our friend finds it fairly easy, or at least not terribly difficult, when she's sitting here in the Sangha to sit with the difficult feelings that come up during meditation or maybe during the talk. And yet when she's home or outside of the Sangha house and outside of the Sangha, she finds it incredibly difficult, and she wants to run away. She wants to, I'm sure, just get up and walk away and get busy doing something, because the difficult feelings are just more than she wants to feel or feels that she can handle. I can certainly relate to that. I can relate to that in a big way. I did something rather extreme, but it was just what I needed, and I knew it. I went on to a retreat, a 10-day retreat, and in the Theravada tradition. This was before I met Thai, I think it was part of why I was able to come to this practice. I needed this in my life. I had read a book about the retreats, and they sounded so terribly difficult because you are required to sit for 10 and a half hours a day. And you have a break every hour and to get up and go out. But there's no eye contact. There's no note taking. There's no journaling. There's no yoga. There's no nothing but being with your mind and body. And when I read that book, I remember something inside of me said, wow, this is what I need. I need this. I knew I needed the discipline to be able to sit with it, like sitting on a hot coal or something and not getting up. And so short of going to prison, I didn't know another way to do it. And so I did that. And I happened to have it just actually popped up a couple of years later that, well, there was the retreat happening right up the road from where I was. So I signed up and I did it. And it was extremely difficult. And that first day, I thought, I'm insane. I am insane. My mind is insane, which is true. The conditioned mind is insane. As Eckhart Tolle says, normal is just another word for insanity. Hope that doesn't shock anybody. Normal is another word for insanity. And so, yeah, it was so difficult. And I had the thought, this is the hardest thing I've ever done. And as soon as I get out of here, I'm going to sign up for another one. And well, you're not allowed to, but I did do 3 I did a month in 2 months. So 10 in, 10 out, 10 in, 10 out. Well, everybody can't do that, but some of you can. I'm sure there are some retreats just like that in Singapore. But the other thing, of course, is you sort of answered it for yourself. When you're here in the Sangha house, you don't find it as difficult. You're able to sit with it. And so practice, 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 practice. So maybe more coming to the Sangha, or sitting with a friend or two friends as often as you can, and setting the clock. I'm not going to get up until that bell rings. I'm not going to do it. And when you think about all the other things you've accomplished in your life, you know you can do it. You can sit with it. Whatever comes, they are just feelings and thoughts. They are not who you are. They're not who I am. They're actually, a lot of it is coming from the collective. It's just energy. It's like, it's like the TV on the airwaves. It's just things flowing through your mind. And when you sit still long enough, you realize how many unrelated thoughts you have in a minute. It's incredible. One moment you're thinking about cooking dinner. The next moment you're thinking about your mother who died. The next moment it's all unrelated stuff. That's when you know you're crazy, or your mind is. You're not, but the mind is. I'm not, but my conditioned mind is. As Ty says, it's true we have free will, but only when we're mindful. If we're in the moment, if I'm not aware of my breath and my body and where I am in this moment, I'm on autopilot. I'm just reacting. I'm just parroting something from the ancestors. And that's why sometimes we say, God, where did that come from? Why did I say that? Oh, that's why. That's why I said that. So I hope that's helpful. Yeah.
Question. I'm on my next line. Thank you for the beautiful speech. Good, related and relatable. So my question is that as we discover the path, and now I can discover the path of Buddhism, and somehow I feel like that now I have to live a double life, because like in the past where we go with friends, go out for drink, go out for food, barbecue, and now all of a sudden, like, we are changing, but a lot of our people around us haven't changed, right? Or they might not change, and sometimes I feel the guilt to reject certain things, and and you can see like Halloween and Thanksgiving, Christmas. We have to do a lot of rejection because our path has changed. And have this guilt in me, like how do we?
Yeah. So our brother is asking, he's saying that he and his wife have made a lot of changes in their daily life, and in how they eat and what they drink and the choices that they make now that they have found this path, and they feel good about that. But on the other hand, they still have their friends and perhaps family and loved ones who are not on the path. People they're still around, and he's concerned about that, of feeling that they might be feeling rejected. Or he feels that maybe he's rejecting them, and them being those who are not on the path and are eating differently and thinking differently, behaving differently in the way that they used to, maybe not so long ago. So how how to reconcile that? Well, that is a really, really wonderful question that is probably in many people's minds and also in the experience of many people in this room, including me. So it is true that even if we're not talking about this path, each one of us is changing. We might change jobs. Our interest changes as we grow older. We no longer have the same interests as the people we were friends with in high school. And that can be just so true. It can be true that if you got married early, that you and your spouse, you and your partner had a lot in common when you were both 23. But now you're 43 and you've changed a lot. And yet you're trying to keep it together, perhaps for the children's sake, or perhaps you don't know why, but or maybe you've even divorced. Maybe you parted. You said, we don't have enough in common anymore. So we change. These things happen. And as we become perhaps more of who we really are, but when we find a path like this, for sure we're becoming more of who we really are. We are having our deepest feelings and thoughts about who I am are being affirmed by the friends on the path. And I love being in this group. I can be myself. But now when I go out and I'm with those who have a different expectation of me, and that can be difficult, and it can cause sadness. It can cause sadness. Sometimes that sadness shows up as anger in your friends or even someone in your own family. He says, why do you want to, we have turkey on Thanksgiving. We always have turkey on Thanksgiving. So you're not going to eat my turkey. This might be mother talking. You're not going to eat the roast beef. Wow, you've eaten the roast beef. My roast beef. Do you not like my roast beef? Is that it? I don't know how to cook anymore. It's like that. People take it very personally, don't they? Especially around food. Especially around food. I had that experience with my mother-in-law. She was very hurt by it. She was very hurt when her son didn't want to drink alcohol anymore. And she actually said, water is no proper drink. In her mind, she was already in her early 90s. And in her mind, what was life without a cocktail in the afternoon? Every adult, as soon as you got old enough to have a 5 o'clock cocktail, you had that. That was part of arriving at adulthood. So in her world, that was the way it was. So it was hard for her. And so, we have a choice then. Do we compromise our beliefs, and do we compromise who we are in order to satisfy someone who's not ready for change? So that is an individual question, an individual issue, and probably changes over time, because it certainly did with me. There is something that we call skillful means. And I saw this practiced with my husband when he was still drinking, and we were married. This was in the late 90s. And you might know Bob Thurman, or know of Bob Thurman. He was the Dalai Lama's first Western student, and he was the first monk in the Western monk, American, but the first Western monk in the Tibetan tradition. And then he went back to the U.S. and decided that a man 6 feet 4 inches tall, with one eye, had one glass eye, walking the streets of Manhattan in red robes and sandals might not be effective. So he went back to school and he taught at Columbia University for years and years. And he's just probably the most well-known Buddhist in America. Mm-hmm. And my husband had occasion to be with him for a month on a trip. And that was actually how my introduction to Buddhism was from my husband. And so Bob was on a speaking tour. He had a new book, Inner Revolution, an incredible book. I had to read it several times to get it. Tibetan Buddhism is complicated in my mind. It's very complex sentences, very unlike our teacher Thai. And so Bob he was on the teaching tour, and he came to our small city. And we took a workshop with him, and then we invited him to our home. So, now I'm the practitioner. My husband is not. And so he comes in, and so I said, well, so Bob, would you like a cup of tea or a glass of water, or we have some juice, or, And my husband said, or Bob, you can have a beer. And Bob said, bro, I think I'll have a beer with you. Yeah, why not? So, my husband just beamed at that. If Bob had said in that moment, no, I'll have a cup of tea with Trish, he would have lost that friendship forever. My husband would have felt shamed, embarrassed, less than, not good enough. Many of those feelings he already had. So those seeds would have been watered in him. So he had the beer, skillful means. And then my husband said, Bob, I'm going to have another beer. Would you like one? And Bob said, why don't we split one? So they split one. And that was the end of the beer for the evening. Skillful means. So that's just one example. So we have to find our way, but we also have to be prepared. When we start out on this journey, and it is a journey of self-awareness, of waking up to who we are and who we all are and what this is all about, leaving that normal world behind. We really are leaving it. But as my guru said, you never run away from anything. Never. You never want to run away from anything. You want to run towards something. So when you run toward your truth, people get left behind. Some will come with you, but I can tell you very few will. But then there's a whole nother world of people waiting for you. A whole nother world. Millions of people waking up. And in these times, these are serious times on the planet. It is not for the faint-hearted, and it is not for what's the metaphor? The wilting flower. It is time to bloom. It is time to speak up, to stand up, to be who you are, and to speak your truth and not be afraid, and realize that there will be many who will follow you from your family, but not all. From your former community, but not all. Mm-hmm. So we teach by our example how we live our lives. It's not really our words. So give it up in terms of trying to change your partner or somebody by offering them a book or telling them something. It's how you live your life, how I live my life, that earns the respect. And that's what's happened in my life. I have many people in my extended family who, they started out thinking she's lost her mind. She's lost her religion, Christianity. She's a lost soul. But I have earned their respect by staying steady on the path. They know what they get when they're around me. I don't manipulate. I don't lie. I'm just myself. Yeah. So you can do that. You can all do that. But be prepared that as the teacher for that Vipassana Theravada retreat that I made, as he says, you cannot ride a black horse and a white horse at the same time. So decide which one you're riding and stay with it. I hope that is helpful.
So there's a question online, and the question is quite related to the previous one. which is how do we introduce this wonderful path to our family who are not keen in Buddhism?
So
how do we introduce this wonderful path to our family who are not keen?
Oh, yeah. So the question, how do we introduce this path to our family members who are maybe not keen on Buddhism? So we don't have to talk about Buddhism. When I was in psychotherapy, we didn't talk about Buddhism. But it was all about breathing, learning to be present for the body, learning what my truth was. Coming out of that normal, the myth of what I had fabricated really in order to get through life. So I had created a childhood in my mind that had not existed. I had conveniently forgotten a lot of things that really caused me a lot of difficulty in daily life, but I wasn't aware of that. I wasn't aware that the root cause of my behavior was way back there in childhood. I thought that little girl, what happened to that little girl it's over. It's done. It's in the past. Get over it. Be an adult. Roll with the punches. That was me. So yeah. So how do we introduce? By being ourselves. Just by being ourselves, being beautiful, being ourselves. But learning with each other what that is. Who am I? What is myself? Or in this case, what is my non-self? And because we enter we look like individuals, and we do live an individual life, and we make individual choices, but we are hugely impacted by everyone else around us, our environment. That's why we spend a lot of time talking about how our environment shapes. I'd like to speak, though, to those families where people do listen to one another and there is love and respect. Then I would encourage you to not compartmentalize your life so that you have this practice and you have this whole community of people and you leave your family members out there. We wouldn't do that in other situations. We would say, wow, there's a concert Thursday night, and I really love this singer. And I know you're not familiar with her, Stevie Nicks, but Fleetwood Mac. But I want to, if you're interested, I'm going, and I can find another ticket. So you invite your friend, you invite your family member. You let them know that, yeah, I'd love for you to join. The people there are very kind, and et cetera, et cetera. So you don't live a life. You don't live two lives. Oh wow, I've done something. This is not a secret society, and it's not a cult, but it can begin to sound like one if we keep it a secret. But on the other hand, the worst thing you can do is try to get into some intellectual conversation with someone in your family or your friends that you already know, down deep you know that they are not open. They may be asking the questions, but you already know it's a setup. They really want a debate, and you don't want to get caught in a debate. It's not about that. No. You'll lose every time and you'll get angry, and they'll get angry too. So I tried that for a long time. I tried leaving books on the bedside table. Just a little subtle something, you know. Never worked. Never worked. Never read one book that I recommended, but read books recommended by other people. So you saw the, you know, the opposition there was, yeah. So you have to kind of know, you know who this family member is that you'd like to introduce this to. Yeah. And use skillful means and loving speech. And again, just being your loving self, your kind, generous self. So thank you. Yeah.
So dear friends, I think it's lunchtime. Yeah, you heard the bell, the long clock chime just now. We are thankful to Sister Trish for the talk and the Q&A. And may I invite all of you to offer a sincere bow to Sister Trish for the insights that she gave us. Okay.